to the AFERM podcast. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. Today, we'll be speaking with Wendell Connor from HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing, all about their Enterprise Risk Management Program. Hello and welcome to the AFERM podcast. Today, we have Wendell Connor from HUD Public and Indian Housing. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you. And we've also got our co-host today, Tal Seaman.
Good afternoon.
So we'd like to start off just, Wendell, if you don't mind just giving us a basic overview of, your program, your agency, your mission, and kind of some of the unique aspects of the risks.
Sure. So I work for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in the Public and Indian Housing Division, or PIH. And PIH is responsible for managing a budget of about $28 billion, and we're looking at about 3.2 million units of affordable housing throughout the United States. So we have regional offices in 9 regions. We have about 1,300 employees in the Office of Public and Indian Housing, and we also have a decentralized operation, which was, we'll get into this, I'm sure, one of the challenges of breaking down the cylinders and bringing it to one PIH.
All right, and in terms of your risk management program, if you were going to say, where are we in a maturity continuum where one is ad hoc, in other words, it's happening, but there's not a lot written down in terms of the structure and how you do it. 2 would be defined, everything is written down, but it doesn't always happen that way. 3 would be regularly implemented, and in which case you're following policies and procedures, and everybody kind of rolls with that playbook. 4 would be measured and managed, where you're learning from your processes and then you're trying to make them better. And 5 would be optimized, where it's very mature and you guys have learned a lot and you're thinking, I don't think this program can get very much better than this.
Yeah, I think we're somewhere in between a 3 or a 4 on that scale. We've been at it now for almost 3 years. It actually took us about 5 years in total to get off the ground, but our risk committee has actually been meeting 3 years. But I can tell you we've accelerated in the last 6 months. We've had a change in leadership in our Office of Public and Indian Housing that has become an executive champion, if you will. So we're at the stage now where we're doing our annual risk assessments, and we're at the stage where we're improving our existing processes.
Fantastic. Now, how are you organized? Where does the CRO exist within the organization? And what kind of office or division supports its practice amongst the organization?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So HUD actually has their own chief risk officer. His name's Larry Costigan. I'm the chief risk officer for the Office of Public and Indian Housing, which is one of the divisions that would report up to the mothership HUD, if you will. Mm-hmm. I sit at the Real Estate Assessment Center, which is one of the 12 different divisions within PIH, but I do report directly for the purpose of risk management to the General Deputy Assistant Secretary, which is the highest civil service level employee in the Office of Public and Indian Housing.
Are there dedicated staff that support the ERM processes and meetings and training and artifacts?
There is. It's a very interesting arrangement in our office in that I also manage another group called the Quality Assurance Subsystem, which is a group of CPAs that primarily do quality control reviews of auditors. So part of the reason we ended up with this function is because of the in-house expertise we already have. I do have a staff of 4 that are dedicated solely to doing enterprise risk management, but I'm able to supplement that staff with the existing CPAs and MBAs that I have working for me for that other aspect of our operations.
Well, let me ask you too. So, where did the idea come to start a program like this over there? I mean, where did this all come from?
Yeah, so we started before A123 had this as a requirement, and what happened is we were having problems with high-profile public housing authorities having financial failure. So the General Deputy Assistant Secretary at the time, her name was Deborah Hernandez, recognized the need for risk management. maybe didn't recognize the need for enterprise risk management, but it was through those initial conversations and a desire to improve our oversight of troubled housing authorities that our ERM program emerged.
Okay, and how does yours enterprise risk management office interface with a larger HUD ERM department level program?
So that's a good question. So HUD, I would say the agency-wide ERM effort was about 2 years behind where we are in PIH, but there's a working group that meets on a regular basis, on a biweekly basis, which is designed to incorporate each of the different program offices into the larger HUD ERM system. We have a process where our risks roll up to the HUD level risk, and we're responsible for managing the PIH level risks.
Right.
Hopefully that answers your question, Adam.
Yeah, that's great. And in terms of the different categories of risks, where you have your operational mission risk, you have mission support structures, CIO, CHICO, CFO, privacy, administrative services, I like reputational risk for the overall agency within HUD or your impact on HUD's reputation, compliance risks, maybe information security program risk. How much of those different categories are now part of the program? Which ones aren't? And kind of why aren't they? And then what's the general trend towards what might get blended in and might not?
So at the agency level, all of those risks are currently being managed at our Office of Public and Indian Housing level. We've spent a lot of time working on strategic risk,
Right.
and spent a lot of time working on operational risk. And actually, it was that operational risk that was the hook that got us to where we are in the maturity model.
Right.
So our risk committee is made up at the PIH level of our deputy assistant secretaries that are responsible for each of our program areas, and it's chaired by our general deputy assistant secretary. Getting deputy assistant secretaries that may not have the background in risk management and may not even have the accounting backgrounds to understand completely internal control and management and the foundations of enterprise risk, hooked to the idea of enterprise risk management. It was those operational risks that really got them interested in running the day-to-day operations. And actually, going all the way back full circle, it was the troubled public housing authorities in our portfolio that keeps everybody interested and keeps this whole thing working for us.
Well, it's nobody likes a crisis and nobody likes a bad story, but it's definitely encouraging to hear how an agency took a challenging situation and turned it into a opportunity to strengthen management processes in a way that make it more agile and more able to see and avoid risk coming down the future. What a great credit to your organization. You guys have done that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and so I mean, it sounds like you have the right folks in the room in the committee. And now to what extent does this drive budgeting and strategic planning and this kind of thing as well?
And let me hop right on that, because that was actually one I was going to talk about next too. Is like in A11, which beat A123 to the punch on ERM. They made the program tied to strategic planning, and then there's specific sections that talk about that the overall objective is to get away from the silo sequential decision making, where everybody runs around to the agency head and says, oh, I got this problem. You got to fund, you got to staff me to fix this problem. And then the next one runs into the office, and then the budget office and Chico have a trail of 2 or 3, 4 executives in a quarter come in and say, the agency had just said this was their number one issue. You got to solve it. And instead to go to this portfolio decision making, where you have risen to the top a series, several different challenges to the organization, such that risk group and then agency leadership can allocate a limited amount of funds and FTE and management attention to optimize the performance of the organization. Are you guys? Does your risk program work along those lines? How does it stack up against this decision-making process from silo sequential to more portfolio decision-making?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, because that probably with all practitioners was our greatest challenge. Getting out of that silo mentality, looking at it from a strategic standpoint. In the government space especially, I think you have very good program managers, but maybe not the world's most trained at strategic thinking. So pulling up what we were trying to do to think more strategically is something we've worked a lot on. We do tie our wrist to our strategic plan. Getting our committee members and our participants to really understand what that means is still a work in process, but that's where we've really seen substantial improvement in the last 3 to 6 months.
Are you getting those exciting conversations where people talk about optimizing the agency instead of optimizing a bureau or a work area?
We are, especially with some of the risks that we foresee coming up in the next 5 to 10 years. So we've gone from this crisis management mode to starting to think strategically about what the policy directives are going to cause to our portfolio of affordable housing units over the next 5 to 10 years, which is a huge paragon shift for the Department of Public and Indian Housing. It's showing that ERM really is a tool, once understood by your leadership, that can really help you optimize your operations.
Right. Well, and I want to understand your role too, as the chief risk officer and your staff. What role do you have in the actual response to some of these risks? I mean, are you the ones that help facilitate getting them on, getting them known, or do you also facilitate some of the responses?
Yeah. So what's interesting about our arrangement is the risk division portion versus what I would call our consulting and audit portion of the other part of the group that I manage. We do get involved in some of the mitigation strategies because, again, we have the accountants and the consulting type of arm.
Right.
But from a purely risk management point, we're just the facilitators.
Okay.
We will offer services to the program offices as a service in a consulting manner. For example, if we've identified a process that needs to be re-engineered, because I have those accountants on staff, they might be part of the team that goes in and helps facilitate the process improvement.
Right, exactly.
Okay, on Wendell, on your profile, do you guys have a centralized written document that serves as this subset of highest risks that has been approved by either your risk council or your agency head? Is this written subset of highest profile risk something that's in place?
It is, and
that's fantastic.
Yeah, and
that's hard to do.
Yeah,
Right.
And if I may, I'll tell you how we developed our first profile, which is maybe different than some other people, but
Let's hear that story.
But it really did help us from the cultural change. So we actually went down all the way to the staff level managers, and the first time we did our profile, what we did is we just said, what are your 5 biggest risks for your program office that you manage? And we took each of those risks, and then we saw patterns across the 12 different offices that we have, and we summarized those to our 10 highest risks. And it was from that 10 highest risks that the agency called our 5 highest risks that made it to the HUD overall risk register.
Well, very good. That conversation across those 12 offices, I'm sure, was one of your pinnacle moments of the program coming together. Was that one of the first times that they had this agency participation, or did they do that during budget formulation and strategic planning as well?
This was the first time that we went down to that level. Now, in subsequent years, we went with just the high-level managers to refresh our risk register. But that, along with, we did a 10-city training program about what we were trying to accomplish. We really thought that that whole culture change was a critical element of what we were trying to do. And by having everybody all the way down to the staff level understanding why we were making this switch to enterprise risk management, I think is paying dividends now in year 3 and year 4.
That's fantastic.
Well, let me ask more on that, because a lot of folks we've talked with, they say that one of the biggest things is trying to get buy-in from folks. And I know you said the operational was kind of something to hook people in, but you specifically in your group, how did you go out and get buy-in on this? Did you kind of have to campaign for it or meet with folks individually, or did you have support to get buy-in on this program?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. So it took a lot of handshaking,
Oh, okay.
a lot of phone calls,
That makes sense.
and early on, our goal when we were having our enterprise risk management meetings were just to get to the next meeting, just to show the individuals involved where the value play is. We live in a world where people think very short term and they want to see results. And in our early meetings, it's like we've met 5 times and we don't have any results yet.
Right.
Where you're dealing with systemic problems that may take 2 to 3 years to really put the right strategic fix in place. How do you convince a group of people to keep going? Our goal was just to have that next meeting so over time they would get more socialized with the concept.
And with this cultural change you're talking about, I know it can be really challenging. We had conversations rolling out a program where people, you're trying to get them to have this disciplined, documented discussion about risk, which is where the real value comes from. But people don't have the same understanding of the words, and there's a little bit of technical vocabulary that helps have a more disciplined discussion. I remember having a 30-minute discussion on, well, what is a risk? And so with a lexicon or a risk strategy guide that kind of lays out your risk identification, analysis, prioritization, reporting process, what have you put in place to help make those conversations less frustrating, more meaningful, more specific, more disciplined? How did you have that situation, and did you address it? If so, how did you guys do it?
Boy, you just talked about year 1 of our program.
Right.
So what we did early on is we did develop a lexicon, and then when we did that 10-city training, we tried to introduce those concepts early on to everybody within our organization, from senior leadership in PIH all the way down to line staff, so we'd be speaking the same language.
Right.
In addition to going to actual field offices where we did the training, we did a webcast that's still available on YouTube for anybody that wants to see what we did.
What's it called?
So do HUD PIH ERM, and it should come up in the YouTube search engine, or we can provide that to you.
There's an extra benefit for pod listeners right there.
That's right. We have to link to that one.
And that's
Extra-
free,
extra
no
value.
charge.
Value add. That's great.
But you could see exactly what we did, and then surprisingly, I forget what the number of hits we were up to, but more than you would think were actually going out and looking at that site. Either that or one of my friends was just laughing at me over and over again watching it.
That's very good. Do you guys have a risk appetite statement? If so, how many of the different categories of risk? I mean, do you have a statement for mission support, privacy, information security program, and any other areas? Like financial would be obviously very big with you guys because of the financial indicators that are tied together with housing programs. But what do you have? How'd you put it together? What made it to the list? What didn't make it to the list?
Well, that's really one of our existing shortcomings. We've attempted on multiple times to introduce that concept and get that document prepared.
Yeah.
It's still a work in process.
Right.
We have a long way to go before we'll have something to offer.
All right, so Wendell, how does that impact your strategic planning? Like when we're doing strategic planning, sometimes agencies have a mix between, executives want to make sure that their target is 100% achievable.
Yeah.
So sometimes you end up with these targets that are actually below existing performance. So it's my strategic target is striving to do less than last year. Now, there's not a lot of operational risk not to hit that versus executives knowing it's okay to set an ambitious and challenging target that's supposed to drive innovation and process change and efficiencies in order to achieve them. How's your strategic planning going in those kind of terms and without a risk appetite? Or what do you think a risk appetite statement would make a difference?
Well, most certainly a risk appetite statement would make a difference. We really struggle with the whole concept of materiality and what matters and what doesn't matter.
Sure.
When we're setting those targets and those, within that whole operational risk I've been talking about, identifying that even though you might have 50 small entities, their impact on our portfolio doesn't touch the one or two large entities. We have one entity that receives about 20% of our total funding. And so without a well-defined risk appetite statement, we really struggle. And that's the one piece of our operation that we still have to build out.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I think most folks are taking this opportunity to track risk and trying to mitigate risk, but I'm not sure how much on the opportunity side, So, I guess for, a government agency, it's not necessarily think about things in private sector terms of, revenue and things like that. But, is there any equivalent to that where you guys are looking for opportunities as well as risks?
Well, that's very interesting because our meeting on Tuesday, we talked about mergers and acquisition models that you would see in the private sector because the public housing industry is really in what private sector would call a shakeout period where we're downsizing our footprint in the investment in affordable housing in the United States.
Right.
So you're going to have a need for providers that are not as efficient as other providers to be consolidated. So we've started talking about using some of those business type techniques that you would more typically see in the private sector. I would say the one thing that ERM has given the Office of Public and Indian Housing is a more of an entrepreneurial look to how they manage their issues in the public housing space.
Right. Because you could look at things sort of an M&A or even organizational change, reorganizing, what are the pros and cons and risks of all those kinds of things. I think there's a lot of tools here available beyond just, what bad things could happen, what good things can happen.
Right, and that there might actually be positive outcomes from that. What I'm talking about are our third-party providers that administer our programs, that we're starting to talk about things like economies of scale and more efficient delivery of the federal awards programs, all of which are steps in the right direction for the federal government.
So I think we'd be interested too to hear what are your goals for the next few years? Where do you want to see your organization's program move? And what the next level of maturity here? What are you looking at?
Yeah, well, certainly that risk appetite statement is something we really need to work on. Continuing to educate the senior leadership in PIH on the benefits of the enterprise risk management program, and then incorporating that further into HUD entity level ERM. One of the things that we as risk managers at PIH and at Ginnie Mae and FHA did, we recognized there was going to be a need at some point to pull it all up at the HUD level.
Right.
So we started meeting before we even had a HUD risk officer to make sure that we had common framework so that whoever got that job, and Larry, he owes us one now, it makes it a lot easier for him because we had the structure in place.
Right, and so you had a framework that allowed, on a perspective level, risk from different areas to be combined in a way that still made sense for senior leaders to compare and act on. That's great. So PIOs and Office of General Counsel, Chief Privacy Officers, both of these offices largely are risk management offices for an agency. I heard one OGC said that his job is akin to supervising a classroom of kindergartners running around the classroom, each holding scissors to keep everyone from getting hurt. Yeah, that made me laugh when he said that, because I know there's so many legal issues out there that OGCs and now PIOs. A privacy officer seems like they're everywhere in every major process change, business change, information management, and they see their jobs as managing the risk for the organization. How have you been able to pull OGC and PIO, I should probably say privacy office, otherwise it probably sounds like performance information officers, but your privacy office and your OGC, how have you been able to pull them into your risk organization? Do they throw these often sensitive risks on the table with the larger senior group and have these candid discussions of what's on the table in their offices?
Yeah, so at our public and Indian housing level, we haven't had involvement with either of those offices, other than from a consulting standpoint on some legal issues.
Right.
So far we've avoided that concern. At the HUD level, I'm sure that will become an issue as we become more mature.
Well, and related, how about the Inspector General's office? What's your kind of
yeah.
coordination? Or,
I was
with them?
afraid you'd ask me about that.
Well, everybody's always curious about that. Yeah.
Now Wendell gets to say, I love my Inspector General's office. They're one of my favorite people.
Well, that's true.
Oh no, so at
It's
the
always the right answer.
That's right.
at the HUD level, Larry's done a lot of work to lay the groundwork on our interactions with the Inspector General. I think as the rest of the industry struggles with this, how much information, we would hope that it becomes a partnership.
Sure.
Because I think both sides could really benefit from leveraging the expertise of the other side, and with complete understanding of what ERM is trying to accomplish, I think we could create more efficiencies within the federal government space, or at least within the HUD space, where you're not running out trying to put in mitigation to risks that really don't exist because they came up in an audit report. So,
Right.
so we are working on that relationship. I'll let you know in the future how that turns out.
With programs, I know programs are really concerned about, well, if I stick something on a risk register, a risk identification, a risk description, some measures on how far along this risk is to being actualized and probability and impact, whatever. Is that something that the IG can get? Is that something that could be FOIA'd? And I know some agencies are working with making policies in their programs that say anything that's on the lower level registers is management pre-decisional information. It's changing all the time in the work environment. So it's not subject to IG audit or FOIA. Only the final profile at the top that gets approved by senior leaders is decision information, and therefore IG, you audit that, you audit how we're doing our risk management according to our policies and procedures. How have you any of those conversations with the IG? How you guys work that out?
Yeah, I haven't directly. I'm not sure exactly what Larry has done. I know
Okay.
he's really been working on that relationship. I would hope, well, my view on this is agency risks are usually pretty well known by the managers and also by the Inspector General.
Yeah, they have their own risk list too.
Right. It's pretty straightforward. So, again, my hope, not just at HUD, but overall in the federal space, is that we view these things as partnerships. So we are all focused on what needs to get fixed or needs to be addressed going forward, and we do it in a cooperative manner.
Fantastic.
Well, I just have one last question for you. Just curious what you think about AFERM. Have you found that to be a helpful organization? You've attended some of the summits and that. Just curious.
Oh, yeah, I want to give a shout out to AFERM. When we were in our very infant stage of trying to put ERM, members of the ERM community, many of which are AFERM members,
Right.
have come and helped us, gave us best practices, advice, looked at our practice. So my recommendation to anybody that's trying to start out at ERM practice, or if you're in the early stages, use AFERM as a resource. It's fantastic.
Okay.
We would not be where we are right now without the assistance of AFERM.
Wendell, man, this has been a great conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us. Well, that's the podcast. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. Check us out at afirm.org. We'll have more information about the organization and other podcasts that are available. We have several more podcasts coming up in the next month. Many exciting guests, so we hope you will tune in. So until next time, this is Paul Marshall signing out. And thanks for listening to the AFERM podcast.